Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Learn Live. Today, I'm here with Kartik, and we are going to talk about integrating OpenAI API-enabled Web APIs with Azure API Management through Visual Studio. So, hi, Kartik.
Hey Daniel, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Can't complain. So far, so good. Living the API dream.
That's good. Can you shortly introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hi, folks. My name is Kartik Kaksabasan. I am one of the principal product managers in Power Platform, and I'm responsible for looking building the appropriate set of developer solutions to allow for code first developers and citizen developers to kind of work well together.
Okay, thanks for that introduction. And I'll introduce myself as well. My name is Daniel Laskewitz, and I am a Power Platform developer advocate at Microsoft. And I work a lot with Power Platform. I have been working with the Power Platform for 7 years already. And I usually focus on making sure that all the developers out there have a good experience within the Power Platform. So I promote features that are coming for the Power Platform, but I also give feedback to the product group about all the features that they have announced. So that's basically my role. Today, we are, of course, doing a Learn Live. And if you want to follow along with these modules, you can go to the link that's on this slide. And you can also scan the QR code if you want to. So let's continue and introduce our moderator, because we have a moderator who is working on all the questions that you have. So make sure to say hi to her. It's Julia Kasper. And if you have questions, put them in the chat, please, because then we'll make sure to handle all those questions. Again, if you want to work on this module as well together with us, we are going to do some exercises, etc. But you are, of course, welcome to also go to this link and do the same exercises as we do. So make sure to scan the QR code or go to the link. And of course, it's live and interactive what we're doing now. So make sure to ask as much questions as you want. The learning objectives for this episode of Learn Live are discovering Azure API Management, and we are going to add a Web API described with an OpenAPI document to Azure API Management through Visual Studio. And that's the objectives that we are going to have. We are going to do this. We're going to talk about the different subjects that are here. And we, of course, are going to do some exercises to show you how you can do that. So without further ado, let's move on to the introduction to API management. And Kartik, could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So API management is essentially an API gateway, all right? And for what it's worth, it allows for us to be able to go ahead and manage multiple different APIs. It's kind of like an API directory in an organization. So unlike in typical environments or most environments where API gateways don't exist, where you have to manage individual APIs in and by themselves, here with API management, you can consolidate that in a directory, if you will, and have various different security controls that are bespoke to each of these set of APIs that you have, or collectively manage them together. In addition to that, it's there to allow both, external, internal partner to be able to explore all the different API capabilities that are available to an organization inside their entire API catalog for all intents and purposes.
Okay, so when you look at API management, how does that tag along into the Power Platform world? Because, of course, we are doing this Learn Live because of Low Code February. So we of course need to talk a little bit about the Power Platform in there. So how does that tag along into this, in the low code world?
Well, it's even more imperative in the low code world, right? I mean, if you look at the kind of apps that we're building with Power Platform, the only way that these apps can enrich and have more enriching experiences is by actually having proper backend APIs to be able to go ahead and surface them appropriately in the respective Power Platform app. All right. So for all intent, what we're talking about in this case is the fact that you have, once you've gone ahead and registered these APIs, if you will, inside the API gateway. Now, from what happens is, instead of your Power App having to know each endpoint individually, it just talks to the API gateway, right? And then from the API gateway, it brokers it within and of itself to find out which API endpoint to go talk to. But in the given from an app perspective, when you're building all these relationships between your front end application and your back end API, it's all being routed through API management. And the benefit of actually having it route through API management in particular is the fact that there are inbuilt experiences, as in integrations inside the API gateway, that allow you to immediately create connectors directly into Power Platform, right? Something, again, no other API gateway capability can go do. So it accelerates the entire app development experience from the API all the way to authoring of the app in that context.
Yeah, and for a maker, that would be, they would see the connector inside of Power Platform, for instance, and they can use that from there. And I also see a little bit about developer portal on this slide.
Yeah.
Is that also something that you can use here?
Absolutely. So API management has two instances. One is the admin interface, where you can go register APIs and things like that. And then you have the user plane, which is essentially a catalog of all the APIs that you've got registered. So most developers, by and large, would only go into the developer portal, especially consumers of the APIs would go to the developer portal and list out all the APIs that they want to go use and kind of click on try. And that will go ahead and allow them to try things out from an API standpoint. Look at all the API interactions, the documentation in this context, and so on and so forth. But by and large, those two main interfaces that you have. In today's Learn Live session, we're going to spend a little bit more time mostly on the API registration mechanism, as if as a developer, I'm going ahead and building my API. But we will walk through some of the developer experiences should time allow to as well.
Okay, so yeah, we're already talking a little bit about the Web API. So let's move on to that part. And the first part of this module is about using Swashbuckle to create an OpenAPI document.
Right.
And that's, of course, to make sure that Azure API Management can work with your API, right?
Right, exactly. So what, as we know, OpenAPI is essentially being able to document this API in an agnostic way, right? Now, what Swashbuckle essentially is it's a .NET library that allows you to enrich your API with the appropriate context. In this case, our API that we're writing is in C#. So we're going to use Swashbuckle in this case to enrich our API so that it builds the appropriate Swagger documentation that can then be consumed by various different applications, regardless of what programmatic language that they're currently using to consume such API in this case. And that's the beauty of what OpenAPI is. And Swashbuckle is an enabler of that, specifically for .NET projects in particular.
Yeah, so I can use Swashbuckle. I can add a little bit of code to my API, and then it will generate that OpenAPI document. And
exactly.
This is something that probably works really well in the Fusion development side of things, of course. At the Power Platform, we talk about that all the time. Yeah, so Fusion development would be like the dev together with the makers and maybe the admins in there together working on a project. And in this case, we would be talking about the developer, the code first developer who would add a Swashbuckle to the to the Web API, actually, right?
Exactly. And that's essentially what we are going to be talking about in this case, is the fact that, how do we generate a lot of these capabilities in that context there. So that's one of the areas that we're going to look at, and exactly how to bring about, enrich the documentation, and then from there consume those corresponding APIs. It also helps the fact that you also get to test out things, and that's one of the cool things about OpenAPI is that because the Swagger doc gets generated, you can actually try out the API even before building an app from the API in that context there.
Yeah, so the OpenAPI document, that's basically a description of the API. So it shows all the different operations that you have within your API and all the responses, the requests, etc. Right?
Exactly.
And yeah, and so OpenAPI has been around for a little while. People can also recognize it as Swagger because that was the earlier name, I believe.
It was a lot cooler, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a lot more swag. Swag. So that's
Exactly.
cool. So yeah, let's move on to a little bit more about Swashbuckle, because when you are in Visual Studio and you have a web API project, you can of course add Swashbuckle NuGet package really easily to your project, and then from there on you can use that within your project. And that's what will actually go into this part, because when you have added Swashbuckle to your web API and you run your project, then you can see the Swagger UI, and that will show you all the different operations that you have inside of your API. And I also see something here on this page, and that is OAS3. Is that something that we should be aware of as well? Because I remember that in Power Platform, there are some versions that are supported within OpenAPI files. So you have OpenAPI version 3 and version 2, I believe.
Right. So OAS3 is actually OpenAPI version 3, which is the most recent specification version that's currently out there in the market. On Power Platform, we currently support OpenAPI v2. And one of the cool things about this integration is that when you are creating connectors directly from the API management gateway, it immediately, whether you store it in API v3 or v2, it immediately knows what the consuming environment, so in this case Power Platform, and generates the API doc based on that specification, right? So even as a developer, I don't have to go ahead and maintain two different versions of the Open API specification documentation. I can just have one, and then API management just takes care of the rest. It's phenomenally simple in the way it actually manages a lot of those capabilities.
Yeah, that's really cool. So without further ado, let's just move on to the exercise, because I think talking about it is a lot of fun, but showing it is a lot better.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so let's talk about the first exercise, and that's using Swashbuckle to create an OpenAPI document.
Right.
And yeah, the parts that we're gonna do, I'm not gonna do anything. I'm gonna let Kartik do all the hard work.
All right. Oh, come on, Daniel. Okay. All right, fine. I'll do it.
So yeah, let's talk about
So
what we are gonna do.
All right, so let me go ahead and share my screen here. All right, so let me open up Visual Studio on my part here. So first things first, when you go into you have to first go ahead and open up the project. So in this case, if you've already gone ahead and downloaded or cloned the repository for the exercise, what I highly recommend is that you go over to the GitHub repository and download the exercise from there. And what you will have is you'll have this inventory management API app showing up here. Now, as you can see, I have my C# application here. Okay. And first things first, we spent a lot of time talking about Swashbuckle. So what I'm going to go do is right click onto the solution and select manage NuGet packages for the solution here. Okay. Just exactly how it is, even on your on the Learn Live site. Okay. And what I'm going to go do here is type in browse and search for Swashbuckle. All right. As you can see, I already have it written here. Okay. And what I am going to install is, because this is an API ASP.NET Core, I'm just going to go ahead and install Swashbuckle ASP.NET Core. Okay. This is, again, just to make sure that I'm working in conjunction with the way the exercise is. All right. As you can see, it says Swashbuckle ASP.NET Core. All right, so I'm going to go select this area. This is the one I'm going to go install to, and proceed to install this. Now, these are all the different libraries that are needed for me to be able to go ahead and refer to and install and reference it and use it in my project accordingly to generate the relevant OpenAPI doc for my code. Okay, so now it's been installed. All right, I'm going to go ahead again, click on install again. There we go. Oh, there seems to be an error. Oh no, so no errors at all. All right, perfect. All right, and there we go. We get the green check mark. Everything's installed. All right, so now what we're going to do from here is let's go ahead and enrich our code in this case. So if you go to the exercise over here, okay, in order to get this documentation, okay, what we'll now need to go do is generate the appropriate annotations in my code. Okay, now as I mentioned, the way to download this code base, the example that I'm currently using, please go click on this following link to go download the application that we're going to be enriching throughout the exercise. All right. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead, you go ahead and open the project solution. And then just like what I did in the exercise there, added my NuGet package. All right. ASP.NET-Core. And then from here, now what I'm going to go do is go to my startup.cs. And I've got code snippets here that I can go ahead and use. So I'm going to go select this particular piece here because now I need to go start enriching, calling this library, if you will, in my code. And again, what I end up going ahead and doing is right at the last point here, I'm going to cut and paste that right then and there itself. All right, that doesn't seem to work out well. Okay, there we go. All right, perfect. Okay, so we have that. Actually, I'm going to do one more thing. The joys of doing things live. Isn't it fun here, Daniel?
That happens to me all
there
the time.
There we go.
No.
All right, so here what I'm doing, Daniel, is I'm actually going ahead and I'm calling up the OpenAPI, just the new NuGet package that I just added. Okay. And then if I go back to my documentation here, it says, okay, so we've just gone ahead and added this above. So are now referencing this particular namespace here. And then we look at configure services. Now, this is a collection that we're going ahead and creating. And what we're doing in this case is under this add controllers piece, add this particular. So this is our generation. Now, this is going to go ahead, read the code, and actually be able to generate the appropriate doc for me to go ahead from an API, from a Swagger perspective. So I'm going to copy this here, all right, and look for this keyword here, services add controller. So if I go back to my code here, where do I see services add controller? Right there. All right, now I'm going to do something here. I'm going to highlight this here and paste that. And now I've got that Swagger doc showing up here. Okay. And the next piece that I'm going to go do is I'm going to copy this part, and right above where it says, the application builder and the web host environment, right after before this says if and is development, I'm going to go stick this piece of code right above that. And so where does that look? Well, right here, if you see here, I've got a piece of code showing up right here. And here's the if clause. I'm going to hit enter and add the Swagger doc right here itself. Okay. So again, I'm enriching my code in this context to go ahead and make sure everything's working properly. Okay. Now in this instance, because I use my project is an ASP.NET-Core project, I also have IIS Express installed locally on my machine. So why is that important? So I'm going to first compile my application here. Okay. And what this will do is it's going to compile the whole thing, make sure everything's working properly. All right. And then launch off a browser instance where I can now see the OpenAPI document, all right, which got generated randomly. And that's all I had to do. I had to just go ahead and stick this in, and presto, voila, it went ahead and generated the OpenAPI doc for me. So here it's about to go ahead and compile things. All right. And as you can see, it's already there listening on port 44371. There we go. There's 44371. It's going to start off, and this is running off my local host, as you can see right there. Okay. And this is going to go ahead and show me the document with the Swagger doc in this context there. So just like what you would see in the exercise as is. All right. Again, we are running live on my machine, plus along with a bunch of other things in the background. So it's going to take a while here.
Yeah.
All right. But
so you added,
but you see how simple that was, Daniel?
Yeah. So you had like multiple parts that you added. The first was the using part, and that's basically to reference the NuGet package, right? That got installed. And then we added the second part. And that was basically the one that would generate the OpenAPI file, I believe. And then after that, there was also the part that did the whole Swagger UI experience. And that's this, right?
Exactly. So remember when I said Swagger, it actually is a JSON file. And even in the learn section, this is how it's generated the document directly from in a JSON context, right there itself. That's my API documentation. And now this can be used across multiple different client applications that want to talk to my API. Now, in this case, the API that I've built is a warehouse application. So let's say I'm trying to figure out what the closest warehouse is for an online market that I'm currently running. I have this API that can tell me the list of warehouses depending on the area code that I'm currently working in. All right. So if I click on the way I got to the screen was I just clicked on that particular link there on my documentation, and it gives me this particular JSON file in return. And now over here, if I also select get, all right, it tells me what these are the parameters. So if there's any parameter that I need to provide, it tells me what parameters I need to provide in order to make sure that I can exercise this API properly. In addition to that, what it says is upon success, it will return a city name with a string. Now, one of the cool things that you have available within Swagger is this try it out button. So if I now click on try it out and and press the execute button, it's actually going to exercise my API. So this is actually running off my machine right now. And as you can see, it says city name, Beijing, Hong Kong, Johannesburg, London, Mexico. These are all the different locations where I have a warehouse. And this is what my API is going ahead and returning. All right. Again, it's still following the same parameter here. And again, the schema, if you can look, it says city name with whatever string parameter that needs to go return in this context. All right. But this is all being generated. So all I did was cut and paste a couple of snippets of code, and I was able to generate something so rich and so intuitive for developers to go use when trying to go build API documentation in this case.
Yeah, so if I had multiple operations within my API, it would show them all, right?
That's correct. Exactly. So here, obviously in our demonstration here, it's a very simple API, which is one API as it is, right? But if you had more than one, you could see a collection of all of them showing up over here, and you could have the same experience. You can execute each one of them and see what each of those APIs actually return from a value perspective.
Yeah, and also whenever we had like parameters, we could input them into this experience as well, right? So
that's right.
For instance, if I had an API where I would have to have an input on a filter, for instance, when I want to filter something down, I could use that in here as well.
Exactly.
That's really, really cool.
All right.
I really like how I really like how few lines of code you have to add, and that it's already finished then.
Exactly. So, that's kind of what it does here. So again, what we did was we opened up the current project. All right. We already had a predefined API as defined there as is. And all we did was take some of the key snippet code. And again, as you saw in the demo, I didn't modify anything that was there on the Learn Live site. I just took the code as is and just pasted it directly into my source code and just ran it. All right. And again, we saw we ran the API IIS Express piece. From there, it generated the URL locally. All right. Now we didn't experience this part here, which is localhost page could not be found, but we were able to identify and look at that. We saw the Swagger JSON file directly, all that as part of this work. So Daniel, I'm going to hand it back to you so we can talk about what we want to go do next.
Yeah. So let's move on to the next part, and that's about publishing the OpenAPI-enabled Web API to Azure App Service, because we were seeing this demo now, and that was all locally. But of course, in the future, we want to publish our Web API to something where more people can access it, not just us handling our local host, of course. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when we want to publish that, we of course want to make sure that that will get published from Visual Studio, for instance. And that's what you already showed, Kartik. You showed the whole project in there, and there is a really easy way to deploy that code, right? You can do like a right-click publish. Yep. In Visual Studio, and then you can select your app service where you want to publish this to, and that's the screenshot that you see here, of course. And here you can see two things. At the left side, you see the app service where you can publish your your Web API to. And on the right side, you even see the API management pane as well, where you can also publish it to API management. So those two steps, of course, you need to do the first one as well, the app service, because I believe API management always needs to have like a public endpoint, right?
It does. It does. So
Yeah.
what we're doing in this case, what you're showing here is this whole notion. So remember, I compiled everything and ran everything locally on my machine. So it was using the compute resources of my machine to be able to communicate back and forth. Now, what you're showing here from a publishing, what this is called a publishing profile. All right. And what that does is that takes that piece of code, bundles it together, and then instantiates a resource. And this could be a VM or a container inside Azure, and then deploy this as in its entirety into that as an API service. So it goes ahead and knows this is the project that I have. You have, right within your Visual Studio instance itself, you can hook it up with your Azure subscription, do all that other fun stuff, and then associate that with the appropriate sort of resource group where you want the API to be hosted, the appropriate connector, and so on and so forth. All that needs to be there, and then from there, the next piece of that particular publishing profile. Now you can take it. Either do the whole thing in one step or do it in two steps, right? One step would be you first go ahead and create the API, just the API instance, all right? As in, you make sure it's provisioned inside the appropriate resources within Azure. And then the next step is register that API into the API gateway so it knows where to go, which public endpoint to go hit, okay? Now, within the publishing profile, it has support to do that together as one. But you may choose to do one step after this, as we show in the in our Learn documentation, right? So you can actually either do it one by one in that sequence, or do the whole thing together. And Visual Studio actually allows you to do that.
Oh, that's really cool. But whenever I'm working with a Web API, for instance, I might run into, for instance, different environments that I have. So when I have a developer environment, a test environment, and production environment, and this right-click publish, this is more of like a developer experience, right?
Right. Yeah.
Whenever you would go into the dev test production environment, wouldn't it be nicer to have like a pipeline for that to promote it from dev to test to production?
Ideally, yes. All right, but also realize I know it's a very loaded question there, Daniel. All right.
Sorry.
All right, but there are things that need to be factored in, right? When you create, also realize when I talk about the term API gateway is not just one and done kind of thing. You can have multiple API gateways. You can have a dev, you can have a test, you can have a prod API gateway, and each of those could map to various different Power Platform type environments. So you can actually coincidentally have an API gateway that is called prod, is mapping to a prod instance of a Power Platform environment. Likewise with QA, likewise with dev. Right. And in dev, you want to make sure things are being iterative, really quickly. You're able to fix things quicker and so on and so forth. You do those kind of things. So there is a strategy available that one can go do. Some organizations just prefer one gateway, and that's okay. All right. But there are others also who prefer to have multiple gateways targeting different environments as well. So you can actually go and Visual Studio and our interactions are pretty flexible in that context to support any kind of topology that you may have to be able to surface these kind of capabilities.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, let's move on to the exercise, because I'm really curious about the publishing mechanism.
Okay.
So in this exercise, we are going to publish the OpenAPI-enabled Web API that we already showed in the earlier exercise, and we're going to publish that to the Azure App Service.
Yes. All right. So let's go ahead and do that. Just to confirm, Daniel, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Yeah.
So remember, we left our code right here. Okay, where we added a bunch of things in our. So here I'm going to go ahead. Actually, it was in the under startup. Okay, and what I'm now going to go do is go to the project here, and now I'm going to go select publish. This kicks off the wizard that I mentioned earlier. This is our publishing profile wizard that starts off. Okay? So in this case, what particular workload am I targeting? I'm going to target Azure in this case. Select next. Okay. Now it tells me what type of rule to go ahead and put this in. All right, I can have Linux containers, Windows containers, it may be, or VMs as it were. So I have a whole slew of capabilities that are there. I can even go ahead and put this thing running inside and register that inside an Azure Container Registry as well. And so I have various different means of actually exposing this web API that I've just gone ahead and built inside Visual Studio. So I'm going to be very simple right now and just go and select Azure App Service here. Okay. And then what I'm going to go do here, now when I start doing that, it says, well, in this particular case, we don't actually have anything here. So let's go ahead and create a new instance. Okay. So there we go. Let's go click on that create new instance. It's now going to go ahead and talk to my Azure tenant and try to load all the subscriptions that I currently have. That would be the most appropriate for me to upload my app service in this case. So in this case, now it's, again, I'm staying inside Visual Studio, by the way, if you noticed, right? I haven't actually opened up a separate browser and opened up Azure and all this fun stuff. I'm staying inside Visual Studio while this thing is actually happening. All right. So here it identifies that that's my Azure profile that I've got. It figures out this is my subscription. I don't want this. What I'm going to go do is I'm going to put it onto my SQL store, okay, because it's what I want to go do. And it specifies my hosting plan. So I'm also going to change that. And so, you know what? I'm going to leave that as is. And I'm going to go ahead and say create. Okay. And this now goes ahead and is everything that you just saw on my machine before, right? I went ahead, it's compiling everything, packaging together, and just making sure. So all it's doing right now is before it even goes the compilation route, it's creating all the relevant entries inside Azure to make sure that the Azure instances are ready to receive the compiled logic of my API and run it in that particular context. Okay. So everything is all lined up and good to go. And all I'm doing right now is making sure that those instances exist so that when I do want to publish this particular profile, it will immediately just work as expected. So now it's going in and creating the app service instance directly inside Azure. And again, as you notice, all this is happening right from Visual Studio itself.
Yeah, so no switching to the Azure portal, for instance. No need to first create an app service there. You can just use it within Visual Studio, and it's just one experience. It's really nice.
Exactly. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead. See, it's already gone ahead and created that particular instance, and it's got a deployment slot there. Okay, and it's ready for it to receive the logic that I wrote up on my machine here. All right. Now I can do one of two things. I can either cancel out of it or go next into the API management instance. All right. So why don't we do this, Daniel? Let's talk about the API management registration stuff, and I'll come back to this and kind of show you how the API management piece works in that. Shall we do that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
All right.
So let's switch to my slides. Yeah. So yeah, we're talking about integrating the OpenAPI-enabled Web API with Azure API Management. And yeah, to do that, you of course need to select the API management, the API management instance that you have within Azure, or maybe create one as well, just like we've shown in the Visual Studio experience with the app service. So whenever you create one, the Azure API Management, there are multiple versions of it, right? I think we have like a developer plan, which is really good for when you want to try it out. Right. And that's also a lot cheaper. But you also have like the production version, which is, of course, because it's also not meant for developer experiences, but for production experiences, it's also a lot more expensive. In this case, I would advise everybody to actually use the developer instance if you're just trying this out. So make sure to do that whenever you are creating an Azure API Management instance. But also, I have a question for the people that are watching, and I don't know if you already had some questions, but I would love to get some more questions from you guys. So make sure to ask a question when you have one. yeah, let's move on. And oh, there it is. I saw I saw the question pop up from Amandeep Singh. Is Swashbuckle tied to C# or is it language independent? Do you actually know that, Kartik?
Uh, I'll be honest. I've only used Swashbuckle in the context of C sharp. It may as of right now, I don't know of any other use cases where I've tried Swashbuckle, but that's been my experience overall.
Yeah. And I know that, for instance, for other languages, there are some other tools that you can use for the same kind of thing. So that's something that is possible as well. And I saw that there's also some links already in the resources that Julia provided. So yeah, that's something that people can look up as well. So yeah, let's move on to
Okay.
to the demo.
All right, let's go. Let's come back here. Now, one
Yeah.
thing, if you have noticed, Daniel, right? And I want to bring this out to the audience that's there. In your exercise, when you go there, you'll see that in one case, you see this option on the page, all right, that says skip this step, all right?
Yeah. Yeah.
This, unfortunately or fortunately, in the build that I have for Visual Studio 2022, that does not exist.
Doesn't it? If you hit
It
next.
doesn't. Okay.
Can you hit next?
So yeah, let me try. See what happens. There we go. Sorry. I
Yeah.
spoke too soon. My apologies. Okay, there we go. And here I thought I just got it. All right. So but here's an example, right? So you can actually just go ahead and click on skip this step, all right, and hit finish, and not have to actually register this directly to API management. You can just stop, get the API instance all published and good to go. And then that way, when you hit finish, okay, let's go. It's going to go ahead and create the publishing profile here. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's how, so all I've done now is that you've gone ahead and it's ready to publish. So if I hit that publish button from this publishing profile, it will go ahead and take that compiled code from my workstation and put it directly into Azure. All right. Now, the other thing is I need to go ahead and add API management. So let's go ahead and add that. Okay. So let's go and say API. Actually, give me a second here. I already have this dependency here, right here. Connect. All right. So this says there are no instances available. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new API management instance. Okay. And again, use that same resource group as what I had before. Okay. And here, since I don't have any API management service in this particular resource group, I'm going to go ahead and create new. As you can see, I'm doing all this in the context of my Visual Studio environment. All right. I'm not doing anything that is outside of it. So in this case, it by default selects to US East 2 of all the different resources that I currently have. All right. I am going to go ahead and select US West 2. All right. Provided that I have, okay, I don't have resources there. Okay. I got to change the name here too inside this particular area. So I'm just going to call this, instead of API, I'm going to call this API 1 or app 1. Okay. And select that. So it's gone ahead and associated that with the API management service. And now I'm going to go ahead and click create. Okay. So again, just like the way it was doing for the app service, going and creating all the relevant resources as the case may be, it's now going ahead and creating the API gateway in Azure itself. All right. There's nothing in there. These are just empty placeholder things that are just getting created on the Azure resource side in the grand scheme of things. All right. But what it's actually doing is it's making Azure ready to receive my code that I've currently got that I'm going to be using as an API endpoint in that environment, in the Azure environment, as it were. All right. Again, same thing. It's going to take its time to go ahead and do things. And like I said, unfortunately, demo gods are conspiring against me. All right.
Yeah, it always takes very long when you are waiting for it, right?
Exactly. So it is what it is. But as you can see, the other intent is for those that are following along with us live, you now have the time to kind of catch up. But this is where you should be at right now, where you've got your subscription name identified, you've got your API name identified, and you're already going in and instantiating the API management service in that context there. So now, all I did was, in this case, was instead of having to republish everything, all I did was said add service dependencies. And that's what you do. Okay. So this is now going ahead and linking up with the API gateway, or rather associating that new API gateway with my publishing profile. So when I hit publish, there we go. Okay. And that should go ahead and take care of things there. Let me just go ahead and see next. All right, project change, configured, NuGet packages, and I'll hit finish. Okay. Generating the ARM template here. APIs app 1 is complete. And I'm going to hit close. Okay. And as you can see now, I'm connected with my API management gateway here. All right. I still haven't published anything yet. So now I'm ready to publish. And if I now hit publish, look at this. It's now going to go ahead and build this capability directly. So it's going to bundle all this together, make sure all the dependencies are all factored in and checking the runtime compatibility and so on and so forth. Okay. And then package all that and deploy it directly into my target environment. Okay, there we go.
And this is something that I can do the first time, but also when I want to update it, right?
That is correct. Exactly. You can keep running the same publishing profile every time you make an update. All right. And while that's going on, you can look. It tells you what settings it's got ahead and put in place, what version of .NET-Core it's running on the target environment. All right. The subscription to which it's tied to, the resource name, and the resource group that it's in. All right. And I can also go ahead. So if I click on this site here, let's copy that for the time being. Okay. And if I go over here, add a new tab, and let's just add that there. Oh, sorry. I thought I copied it. And it's not copying. Wonderful.
Maybe we'll wait until the publishing is done, and then it might work.
Yeah, exactly. It could be. It's just me being impatient, I guess. You know, what can I do? But there we go. While this was going on, while I was making a fool of myself, here we go. It's installing the .NET CLI tool on, with Swashbuckle services directly onto the target. Okay, there we go. See, I knew it. It was, my copy paste was just a little too slow. But here it is. Okay, it's still going ahead and instantiating. This will become an actual website in this case. All right, and you know why that happened? And you were right. It was because the publishing hadn't finished. So there we go. So if I click on that again, there we go. Same thing. All of you should be able to see this in your exercise there. So if we go over here, you'll see if we click on publish, verify that the API is running. That's exactly what you see there. You see that? All right. Now, what I am going to go do is on that particular site, all I'm going to do is add Swagger. All right.
Add
and
some
look,
swagger
exactly. I'm just going to add a little swagger to it, And again, now this is working directly off of Azure. So everything that I just did, I published it, so on and so forth. All that stuff just happens. It's now working directly within Azure. All right. And again, if I click on that particular link again, I can still see the same JSON description of the API itself. All right. If I hit get, let's try it out. Shall we try it out?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's do it. Okay. So here I'm going to try it out. And remember, last time when I run it locally, it gave me a list of all the different cities where my warehouses were. So if I now go and hit execute again, you should all now see this. You see, same output, except this time around, it's not running locally off of my machine. It's running off of Azure directly.
And this is also now available for everyone, right? Because it's published.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now it's a public endpoint. So if you go back to your session here, just exactly what I did. I took that particular URL at the top here. All right. And all I did was add Swagger. And now I have a list of all the options. And again, we did the trying out part over here. Hit execute. And we got a list of all the different locations in that context there. All right. But this is what we currently have here as is. All right. So the next piece is obviously it's going ahead and trying it out. What we did was unfortunately out of habit, I went a little ahead as well. So besides looking at the resource, All right. I've also gone ahead and registered that in API management. So we did this part here where we registered the relevant pieces directly into the appropriate API management instance, just like we did with the app service. Okay. And then we saw this happening live. So that's what we have there. All right. And then it goes ahead and specifies. In this case, in our screenshot, you see Korea, but I did US because I'm in the US. All right. And I hit finish. And as you saw at the end, you saw the API management being connected and configured properly there. All right. And now let's go back. Now, this time around, we're going to move over to Azure. Okay. So let me go back to my Azure instance. All right. And I'm going to select API management services inside Azure. And there we go. You see that? I have my API right here, which I created from my Visual Studio instance. If I select the API, all right, I have my inventory management app. And by the way, if you weren't aware, Daniel, if you were to just gradually hover around here, look what you have here.
Ah,
aha!
I like that.
All right, so here we have our warehouse API, and let's go ahead and make sure that this is also working properly now that we've got ahead and registered. All right, so let's go ahead and select the API. Okay, and remember, just like the way we saw it on Swagger, it should go ahead and give us a list of all the different warehouse locations. I'm going to hit again send, and look at that, HTTP 200 OK, and my API is returning all the possible locations directly from that API. And that's the cool thing going forward. When we go ahead and look at how this API is registered, when people are going to be consuming it, they're going to consume this URL. All right. They're not going to actually consume the app service URL like we saw before. This is the URL that they'll now consume going forward. All right.
So it's a different API in that case, right? You're kind of using API management, as a gateway to actually call the same API that we had already. Right. But it has a different name. So
it's a different URL. Yes. So the API has not changed. All we're doing is we're abstracting it completely, because let's say if tomorrow that the endpoint somehow magically shuts down and we have redundancy made available there, API management is smart enough to go ahead and redirect it accordingly, depending on how you've gone ahead and read. So we didn't exercise that particular aspect of API management, but that's another one capability that API management has, that it has ways to also do things like load balancing and things like that already baked in as part of the gateway as is.
Yeah, and I believe there's also some security, right, which you can enable in there. For instance, if you want to have an API key in front of it, for instance,
got it.
You can use that as well in here.
Exactly, and then along with that, you can also specify things like your access control pieces, all the relevant pieces that you need. You can also look at the various different authorizations now. And as you can see, we now also have a Power Platform icon directly in the API Management Gateway UI. All right. So here I can now go ahead and create a connector. So just not only can I just right click at the API and create a connector, I can also go into this menu area itself and create the appropriate connector as the case may be.
Oh, that's really nice.
All right.
Okay.
So if you look throughout where we are in the exercise, all right, we've done these things. We've gone ahead and cloned a repository from Git. All right. In this case, that was already done. Where we had this exercise, we enriched a piece of code or API, inventory API, that was built in to embellish it with the appropriate annotations for generating a document, an OpenAPI documentation. We first compiled it locally, all right, to make sure everything's working properly. Because what does that do? Why did we do that? We actually baselined that experience, right? It baselined the experience of seeing exactly what was happening on a local basis. So if, as we were moving it to various different stages, if there was any kind of inconsistency that would have showed up, we would know if something else messed up in the way we were going ahead and deploying. Well, thankfully in our case, none of that actually happened. All right. We established a baseline. We then took it over to the app service. From the app service, we again ran the Swagger UI directly. It worked off just fine. From Swagger, from the API management app service instance, we were then able to register the API directly into API management. And then again, test it again and make sure that across all the key stages, the results were all identical in that context. So that's essentially what we covered during this course of this exercise for what we have. All right. And again,
Yeah.
the next piece after this is your knowledge check.
Yeah. So of course we want to see how everybody is doing on their knowledge now. But before that, maybe we have time for another question. I don't know if
Absolutely.
there are any questions. Let's wait a little bit until, yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, so we got a question from Ruben Guines. I hope I'm pronouncing that all right. Hi, how about rollback management to face crisis situations?
Yes, you can roll back. You have the ability, and remember, within API management, you have inbuilt capability of versioning, so you can actually roll back to a prior version of the API as well. So those kind of capabilities are already baked into API management as a capability. So that's a great question, Ruben. But yes, that is a capability that's already there within API management and available today.
Yeah. Okay, there's another question from Amandeep Singh. Is there any Slack or Discord available for Azure? I'm actually not aware of some official Slack or Discord that's available. I believe there are.
There is a community there in Discord. Absolutely. I'm not sure
Yeah,
about Slack, but definitely in Discord. Absolutely.
yeah, and I'm not sure if it's an official Azure server, but there are tons of community servers already available. I know for the Power Platform where Kartik and I already work with, we have tons of Discord servers, and I would be surprised if Azure didn't have ton of them as well. So yeah, on that side there are some. I'm just not aware of the URLs there. Yeah, let's move on to the knowledge check. Yeah, and the first question.
Hmm.
So the first question is, to generate an OpenAPI documentation for your ASP.NET Core Web API, which NuGet package is the most popular? And we have three answers here: OpenAPI.NET, Swashbuckle, and Swagger. So let's see what your answers are. If you want to give the answer, you can go to aka.ms/polls or scan the QR code, and then you will be able to vote on that. So let's wait a little while until there are some answers. So let's see.
So what do you think? What do you think? I mean, we went through the exercise ourselves. Is it OpenAPI.net or Swashbuckle or Swagger? What do you think, Daniel? Come on.
Yeah, I think we have talked about B and C. So those two, for me, are the most familiar. The OpenAPI.net, I'm not really sure about that.
Mhm. Well, OpenAPI.net doesn't exist.
Oh.
Oh, did I give out a hint? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm actually seeing that there aren't a lot of answers on that as well.
Oh
So
my gosh. All right. Okay. See. Okay. Then I feel a little bit better now. So clearly I wasn't leading the witness here.
yeah, so I'm seeing that most people actually respond to B,
Yep.
and that's Swashbuckle. So let's see what the answer is. And
Ta-da.
it is Swashbuckle. So that's the first answer. So well done, everybody. And most of you also had it correctly. So let's move on to the next one. And that's question 2. And that's, what could be the simplest way to publish your ASP.NET Core Web API app to Azure App Service? And we have 4 answers there. Right-click on Visual Studio and publish the application. B, use Azure Portal to publish the application. Or C, use Azure PowerShell to publish the application, or D, use Azure CLI to publish the application? Well, I know, Kartik, you really love the CLIs, right?
Oh, absolutely. I do. I do. I have a very strong bias in favor of them. So, but you know, yeah. What can I say? And especially, by the way, speaking of CLI, have you tried out the new Azure Developer CLI?
I haven't yet. I should really do that.
You
Have
should.
you?
You should. I have. It is pretty slick.
Oh, nice.
Hmm.
Yeah, so let's discuss these answers also. Yeah, so the CLI, we were already talking about that.
Right. Well,
The Azure CLI.
well, you do. You
Yeah.
have the ability to do that. I mean, let's be very clear. All the functions that we saw, you have the within Azure CLI. You have the ability to orchestrate the appropriate set of resources, be able to kick off the appropriate set of. As a matter of fact, some of the integrations that we saw actually execute the Azure CLI in the background. All right. So
Mhm,
it's not to say the fact that one approach is better than the other. They kind of build on top of each other in this case as well.
mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, so all the answers, they could be done,
Hmm.
but yeah, of course, the question was what could be the simplest way
Exactly.
to publish your web API to app service.
Hmm.
And I see that a lot of the people, actually, even all the people, were right with this question, and that's of course answer A,
Hmm.
and that's right-click on Visual Studio and publish the application. Okay, so yeah, let's move on to the last question, and that's question 3. While publishing your ASP.NET Core Web API app within Visual Studio, which is incorrect? And we have 4 answers here. A, you can create a new Azure App Service instance to publish the Web API app to Azure. B, you can only use an existing Azure App Service instance to publish the Web API app. Or C, while publishing the Web API app, you can use an existing app service plan or create a new one. And D, while publishing the Web API app, you can integrate it with an Azure API Management instance.
Hmm.
So the votes are already open.
Mhm.
Kartik, what do you think?
Well, I mean, think about it, right? You can go ahead and uh, in the demonstration you saw me, right? I went ahead and created resources when one did not exist. We also discussed the fact that if something's already created, you can reuse it. Right. So there is that ability to go do both those operations. One, if a resource does not exist, we go ahead and create. Now, in the case of our demo, we spent more time talking about creating net new resources. But if those resources already existed, we could have just gone ahead and redeployed a newer version of the API, if you will, directly on top of the exact same resources and gotten the same result as well. So
Mhm.
again, I'm not going to say which letter, but I think you kind of got the idea.
Yeah, and I see the answers, and 81% of the people who are currently watching and voted are correct, and it's of course the answer B. You can only use an existing Azure App Service instance to publish the Web API app, and that's the one that's incorrect.
Mhm.
So, yeah,
By the
with
way,
that,
Daniel,
yeah.
I like the twist. The fact that it was no longer the correct answer; it was the incorrect answer. So,
Yeah, yeah,
kudos.
we need to make it hard for people to to get everything right, of course.
I hear you. I hear you.
Yeah, so I have done a lot of Microsoft exams so far. I do a lot of those exams just to kind of show off that I have the knowledge, and I know exactly these kinds of questions happen in the exams as well. So whenever you do an exam, make sure that you look really, really good at the question, because sometimes there are questions like these where you might think correct, but it's incorrect, and then it's easy to make a mistake here. Yeah, so we are now at the end of the knowledge check, and yeah, let's have a short summary. in this module, we covered discovering Azure API Management. We showed you all the different possibilities of Azure API Management. Next, we added a web API described with an OpenAPI document to Azure API Management through Visual Studio. And that was the whole right-click and publish experience. So yeah, if we move on, we also have some resources that you can find at the aka.ms link that you see here, or you can scan, of course, the QR code, and there are some interesting links there as well. This is the link again to the module. So if you want to, you didn't follow along, make sure to go to that link if you want to do it by yourself as well. And with that, we are at the end of this session. I see that we have built a Power Apps component part in there, but I'm not sure if that's still the case because there was some discussions about it. So let's hope that this was the correct one. Yeah, at the end of the session, yeah, I want to thank you, Kartik, for helping me with all the demos because yeah, I couldn't do it all by myself, of course, and it's always fun to have you. So that's a great thing. To our viewers, I would like to say thank you for attending this Learn Live session, and I hope you learned a lot from this explanation. And with that, yeah, I think we should stop this session. So thanks a lot, Kartik. Thanks a lot, viewers, and hope to see you at the next Learn Live.
Absolutely, looking forward to it. See you.